Yes, good morning, students.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, good morning.
Good
So
morning.
today we are here with the paper BELA 137. The paper is titled Language Through Literature. Please mute your phones, please. There's a disturbance. Okay. We are starting with the paper Language Through Literature, BEGLA 137. Just as the name suggests, language through literature. What we are going to look at is how we can learn language through literary pieces or through literature. How are we going to learn a particular language through its literature? And here it is, English, the foreign language to us. See, we are going to look at the first block and the second block today. The first block talks about a very important topic, which is how literary language differs from the ordinary language or the practical language. How literary language differs from the practical or ordinary language. That is what we are going to discuss today first. How we are going to learn a language through its literature, and how see how the writers make it difficult for us to understand certain pieces of poetry or a prose piece by changing their style or by using certain devices, which are the devices they mainly make use of, and how these devices sometimes, though they are having aesthetic value, sometimes we feel it hard to understand a particular poem because of the usage of this extension of meaning, or what we call the usage of literary or figurative devices. These are the things that we are going to discuss today. So how literary language is different from an ordinary language. That is the first unit that you have, literal versus metaphorical meaning.
പിന്നെ എനിക്ക് ഇന്നോടെ ക്ലാസ് ഇപ്പുറത്ത് നടക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ അതിന്റെ ലിങ്കും ഞാൻ തന്നെയാണ്. അതിന്റെ ലിങ്ക് അഡ്മിറ്റ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുക. വരുമ്പോ ആ കാലം നോക്കും.
Yes. Hello, sister. Hello, sister. Okay, so let's today begin with the first unit, which talks about the relationship between language and literature. Hello? Hello, sister. Please mute your phones. Yes, good morning, Ekta. So let us quickly get into the topic, which discusses the relationship between language and literature. It is there in Unit 1, Block 1. We are into Unit 1, Block 1, literal versus metaphorical meaning. See, what do you mean by literal meaning of a word? What do you mean by the literal meaning of a word? ഒരു വേർഡിന്റെ literal meaning എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ എന്ത്? See, it is nothing but the meaning that you find in a dictionary, the literal meaning. Meaning that you find in a dictionary is its literal meaning, and the metaphorical meaning is the meaning that poets or writers may provide to it. Just a second, students.
മഴയാ മഴയാ.
Ma'am, good morning, ma'am. Hello. Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
മൊബൈൽ വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. മൊബൈൽ വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. അവിടെ ആർക്കും ഇല്ല. ഇല്ല ഇല്ല. അത് 15 പേർക്കേ ഉള്ളൂ.
Hello, ma'am. Hello.
ഇവിടുന്ന് രണ്ടുപേർക്ക് ഞാൻ വായിച്ചേൽപ്പിക്കാം. ജിയോമ്മയ്ക്ക് എംബേറ്റിലേക്ക്, ജിയോമേരിസിന് എംബേറ്റിലേക്ക്.
Hello, students. There was a break. Please stop sending messages. Do not chat during the class. If you have any doubts, you can ask me after the class. I'll give you some time to ask doubts.
Ma'am, one doubt is there. Ma'am, which book you are making, like giving the lecture?
The paper is BEGLA 137.
7. Okay, thank you.
Yes. 137, we are into block 1, the first unit, language and literature. We are talking about. See, in actual life, what we mean by a particular word or what meaning that we find in a dictionary is what is called the literal meaning of that word. But when we use it in a creative manner, we use it in an aesthetic, we use it in order to create aesthetic pleasure. We use it in a different way than the ordinary way. We call it the metaphorical way of using the word. Literary language, what it does, it uses language not in a day-to-day real sense or the real practical language. Literary language, what it does is it may sometimes deviate structurally from the original language in many ways. Sometimes we can see poets making use of very glaring grammatical mistakes or very glaring changes in the sentence structure, but they do it not particularly in order to show their ignorance, but what they do is they make use of such ungrammatical or see the change in the sentence structure occurs because they want to change the usage of the language from the ordinary way, and they want to provide us what is called the aesthetic pleasure, the pleasure of reading it and understanding it, the pleasure that one derives from the observation or the reading of a particular piece of literature, the joy that we get when we read a piece of literature, be it a poem, be it a prose piece, anything.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
There's so much disturbance while you're speaking. It's not clear. Can you please ask everyone to mute or something? What you're saying is not clear.
Okay, let me remind all of them. Hello, students. See, you're reminded that you have to keep your phones muted. Please do not unmute your phone. It's creating disturbances to others.
Sit down.
Ma'am, it is from sister, ma'am.
Yes, hello.
ജോസിയാസ്റ്റർ അവിടെ ഇല്ല. ജോസിയാസ്റ്റർ ഏതോ പേഷ്യന്റ് വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്.
Hello, sister. Hello, Manju sister. Hello.
സിസ്റ്റർ ഉണ്ടല്ലേ?
Just a second. I'll call sister and ask her to mute her phone if possible.
അതൊന്നും അറിയില്ല.
Okay, ma'am.
നമസ്തേ. എന്തോ
Yes, hello. Please mute your phones, all of you. Is your teacher here? Please mute your phones so that it doesn't become a disturbance. So now we are talking about literary and non-literary usage of a language. See, why does why do people make use of literary language? Why do poets and writers make use of literary language? See, they make use of it because they want the readers to have what is called the aesthetic pleasure. The pleasure that they have on reading a particular piece of literature. See, and how does it differ from an ordinary language? The ordinary language is used in order to carry out the practicalities of everyday life. Real life situations, ordinary usage of the language, non-literary usage of the language. But see, when literary people, when people who are in the field of literature, they use language, they change it a bit, they use it in a different way in order to make the readers have what is called the aesthetic pleasure. So we know that language is a means of communication. See, and it functions in two ways. See, it functions in two ways. One is the spoken aspect and one is the written aspect. One is speech and one is writing. Please mute your phones. Hello. Someone whose camera is on. Camera off, Aqua. Phone mute. Yeah. Yes, hello. Okay. See, while speaking, we make use of vocal and auditory system. We know that. We make use of the organs of speech. We make use of the vocal cords. We make use of the air from the lungs in order to produce a particular speech sound. See, speech sounds, they are transient in nature and we make use of the organs of speech in order to produce them. See, and while speaking, what we can do is we can have different degrees of pause. That means we can pause a while, we can pause for a longer time, we can change our intonation, we can change our tone to reveal our emotions, feelings, etc. But that is not possible to a certain extent in writing. See, during the conversation or during speech, most of the time, the speaker and the hearer or the listener, they are generally close. See, think of the literary pieces written in India or somewhere else. See, today we have access to literature throughout the world. Written literature throughout the world. There are audio books available. There is written literature. What happens is, see, though there is a large, vast distance between the producer of the work and the reader, we still have access to it. And that is why the writer needs to be more and more careful while expressing his views and thoughts. See, while having a speech or while having a conversation, what can happen is, see, we can leave the sentences grammatically incomplete. We can make use of gestures, facial expressions in order to show our emotions and feelings. But the writer, during writing, what happens is, see, since there is distance, one cannot, see, adjust with the, what is called the facial expressions or the gestures. One has to do is, he has to be complete, grammatically complete. So this is the difference between speech, spoken and the written aspect of any language for that matter. See, and then we have something called the direct and the indirect speech. We can say things as said by the other person, putting them into inverted commas. ഒരാള് പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യം inverted commasനകത്തിട്ടുകൊണ്ട് ഡയറക്റ്റ് സ്പീച്ചിലൂടെ നമുക്ക് അയാൾ പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യം അതേപടി അവതരിപ്പിക്കാൻ പറ്റും. And at the same time, we can, as we are telling the same thing to a third person, see, we are telling the same thing that we heard from the second person, we are telling it the third person. What we do is we make use of indirect speech. See, while making use of indirect speech, we make certain changes in the sentence, certain words are introduced, certain changes are made in terms of the structure of the sentence. Changes in punctuation marks do occur. So these are some of the changes that we make while we change a direct sentence into indirect sentence. See, in writing, we come across these two varieties of speech, which is the direct speech and the indirect speech. See, in your text, there is a sentence given. She said, I'll come here tomorrow. She said, I'll come here tomorrow is the sentence in the direct speech. And when we get into indirect speech, it becomes, she said that she would go there the following day. See, all the punctuation marks have been removed. Only the full stop remains. The comma, the inverted commas in which the speaker's exact words were quoted, all those vanishes or disappears. So this is how we make a direct speech, a sentence in the direct speech into indirect one. See, why are we talking about all these things while we discuss language through literature? See, it is because, see, these are different ways in which writers can express their feelings, emotions, etc. to us. See, while they are creating characters and making them talk, direct speeches, sentences in the direct speeches may be there, sentences in the indirect speeches may be there. So that is why we talked about direct and indirect speech. We need to know them, which are the direct speech, exactly quoted words by the speaker. And the other one is, see, we are converting it for the sake of the third person. You are the listener and you have converted the exact words of the speaker into a different. The idea remains the same, but the sentence structure, the punctuation marks while we write it, everything changes. So now into the next topic, which is literal versus metaphorical meaning. See, literal versus metaphorical meaning. As I told you, what do you mean by literal? Literal meaning of a sentence. See, if you talk about literal, the original sense in which a word is used, or the meaning that you find in a dictionary is called its literal meaning. See, when we say that a dog is man's faithful friend, best friend, we are using the word dog in a literal sense. We are referring to a particular animal. We are using the word dog in a literal sense. But there are cases when we say that, see, when we talk to a person and say that, don't bark like that. See, don't bark like that. See, that does not mean that we are calling him by the name dog, but we are actually trying to extend the meaning of the word bark. The word bark denotes the sound which the dogs make, but here we are extending the meaning to the human being when we say don't bark like that, Hari. So don't bark. That means don't make sharp and loud noises. So here what we have done is we have made use of the extended meaning of the word bark. Extended meaning of the word bark has been used here. This extension of meaning, this kind of extension is called metaphor. So we are extending, we are comparing the man to a dog, and then we are using the word for the sound that an animal makes in order to denote the sound made by the human being. See, another example is with regard to the word calm. See, it's there in your textbook. I'm reading out from your textbook itself. I believe it's there in page number 6, block 1, unit 1, page number 7. Those are the pages that I am referring to.
Page number 11, ma'am.
Okay, yes. Sorry, page number 11. See, you are talking about the word calm and its two meanings, the literal meaning and the extended meaning or metaphorical meaning. See, you should comb your hair more often. When we use that word there, it is a verb. You should comb your hair more often. When we say that, we use the word comb in the literal sense. But when we say that the police combed the forest for the missing box, it means to search thoroughly. Combing means to search thoroughly there. Though it is a verb here also, there we are using it in an extended sense. Extended meaning of the word comb has been used there. So when we do not use the word with the dictionary meaning or with the meaning shown in the dictionary, what we do is we are using it metaphorically, or we are using the extended meaning of the word. So this is how you differentiate between literal meaning and metaphorical meaning. Literal meaning is the meaning which is found in the dictionary. directly that the meaning that we can find out in a dictionary. And the metaphorical meaning is the one that we make use of in order to sometimes extend the meaning to from a animal to a human being, from a human being to an object, likewise. See, and then why do we make use of this metaphorical meaning? See, most of the time writers or authors make use of this literary meaning, the metaphorical sense of the word in order to make things more appealing, attractive, pleasing, in order to show that they are a step ahead of the common writers or readers as such. See, each of the writer makes use of words in a different way, and that forms their style of writing, making use of words in a different way, making use of words with their extended meaning. And when they do that, it becomes the piece of writing become more appealing. So now into the next topic, which is we are moving on to the extension of meaning. The next topic is extension of meaning, which is there in, I think it's there in page number 9, extension of meaning.
Page
From
number
a concrete
13.
Okay, I think there is a difference in page number because I am going through the book online. That may be the reason why the page numbers differ. Anyway, the topic is extension of meaning 1.4. That may not differ, I think. From a concrete object to an abstract idea. See, what are concrete objects? Concrete objects are those which can be touched, which we can anyhow can shift from one place to another. All those things are called concrete objects. And there is something called the abstract idea, abstract things or abstract idea. See, things like honesty, truth, discipline, all such things we can just refer to. We cannot point out a particular thing and say that it is honesty, it is truth. So those are abstract ideas. And what poets do or writers do is most of the time they keep shifting the meaning of a concrete object to an abstract idea as such. See, we have words like rusty nails. See, we have words like rusty nails. But there are people who say that his knowledge of history was getting rusty. See, we can understand the word rusty nails, nails which are covered with rust. But writers may make use of sentences like his knowledge of history was getting rusty in order to say that his knowledge, he is, with the passage of time, he is forgetting things. His knowledge of history is fading. ആ ഒരു സെൻസിൽ നമ്മൾ ഹിസ്റ്ററിയുടെ അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ അറിവ് റസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നു എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ it has been a long time that he has read about things, and maybe that he is having a tendency to forget things. That is why we say that his knowledge is getting rusty. So the concrete object, the idea that we use for concrete object, writers sometimes shift it in order to talk about the abstract ideas. See, how can knowledge be rusty? So knowledge is something which is an abstract idea. We cannot point out knowledge. We cannot shift knowledge from one place to another. We cannot say, point out to a particular object and say, see, this is knowledge. We cannot say that. It's a concrete idea. And that is why, see, when we talk about knowledge getting rusty, it is an extended use of the word rusty there. And poets and writers make use of such sentences in order to make things more appealing, make things more interesting. See, when one reads such a sentence, one wonders how come that knowledge gets rust. What might be the meaning of it? We may wonder about it. We may talk about it to our friends. And then we can come to a conclusion that, see, it is about the forgetting of things by a person, that the author has used the word rusty there. His knowledge is getting rusty. We make use of such a sentence in order to show that the person is in having a tendency to forget things. So this is what is called extension of meaning. And this also writers make use of most often. See, then we have the next topic, which is from living to non-living and vice versa. See, from living, that is animal or human, to non-living things. See, we often talk of the leg of a table. We often talk of the hands of the clock. See, clocks do not have hands, but what we are doing is we are extending the meaning of a particular word to an inanimate or non-living object. See, hands, leg, mouth, these are associated with human beings, animals, but they are extended to the non-living beings. What we are doing there is we are actually personifying. So personification is one aspect of literature, literary language, which poets or writers most often make use of. See, it can be done the other way around as well. When we talk about a person having, crooked nature, he is a crooked person. See, sometimes we talk of people being crooked. See, the word crooked is often used to describe a rod or a stick which is not straight. But twisted ആയിട്ടില്ല, straight അല്ലാത്ത ഒരു വസ്തുവിനെ denote ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് നമ്മൾ crooked എന്നുള്ള word ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. But we often see people using the word crooked in order to denote a particular person's behavior. He is a crooked person എന്ന് നമ്മൾ പറയാറുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ that means that he is not straight in his dealings. He is having some amount of dishonesty in his nature. So both ways, that is from living beings or living things to non-living things, and from non-living things to living things, the transfer of extension of meaning can be done. So this is how poets or writers do it. See, we often talk about people who change color. അവർ നിറം മാറുന്ന ആൾക്കാരാണ്, എത്രയും പെട്ടെന്ന് നിറം മാറുന്ന ആൾക്കാരാണ്, ഞാൻ നിറം മാറുന്ന ആൾക്കാരാണെന്ന് നമ്മൾ പറയാറുണ്ട്. That is an extension of the idea which we see in a particular animal, and it is extended to a human being, the change of color according to the background. So there are people who change their behavior according to the situation, keep changing their statements, keep changing their behaviors according to the situation. So such people, we say that this man is someone who keeps on changing his color. So these are some of the ways in which writers make use of the extension of meaning. See, now into I think we should move on to the next topic, unit 2, which is again about extension of meaning. But there we are getting more familiar with phrasal verbs. We'll be getting familiar with what is called multiple meanings. See, we have heard of words which have different meanings in different contexts. Words having different meanings in different contexts. Such words are said to have multiple meanings. For example, the word light. The word light, when we talk about objects, when we talk about objects, we say that a certain object is heavy, a certain object is light, feather is light, a wooden plank is heavy. So there, the meaning of the word light is something different from the meaning of the word light when we talk about darkness and light, the sunlight. So the word light has several amounts of several meanings in different contexts. He is a light-hearted person. If we talk of people, he is a light-hearted person. It becomes a totally different meaning of the word light. It is a totally difference in terms of meaning when we use the word light in this context. See, he is a light-hearted person. See, in your text, I think page number 22, related multiple meanings. 2.3 is the subunit, related multiple meanings. The example given in your text is bearer. See, a person who bears or carries is called a bearer. Bearer of this letter, bearer of this luggage. So, a person who carries a load or who carries a particular thing is called a bearer. And there are occasions when we use the word for a male servant in Indian English. Sometimes we make use of the word in order to denote a male servant, one who serves food. And there are also, when we talk about money transactions, about banking, the word bearer has a different meaning. A person who holds a check for the payment of money to himself. Pay the bearer the sum of rupees 2000. So, such people who hold a check for the payment of money to himself, such people, such persons are called bearers. So, the word bearer, here 3 meanings of the word bearer is given. Though the sense remains the same, when we use it in 3 different contexts, things do differ.
Can you say which part you are in now?
I told you 2.3, related multiple meanings. See, I have skipped certain portions because I cannot go line by line. We just have hours with us to discuss this particular paper. I told you, I gave you an idea about what is meant by extension of meaning, what is meant by metaphorical meaning. And then we are moving into what is called related multiple meanings, 2.3. The section is 2.3. See, because I am looking at the text online, the page numbers may differ. My text shows page number 22.
It's
Okay,
page number 31 for the students.
Okay.
I'm on the online, ma'am. So in the
Okay.
22. Okay,
Okay,
thank
it's
you.
22. Yes. Okay. So now we are talking about the word bearer. How the word bearer, when it comes in 3 different contexts, it carries 3 different meanings. Number of literal meanings of the word are possible. See, there are other examples to cap, fly, nursery, etc. When we talk of a nursery, we are talking of an area where plants and trees are grown in order to be sold or planted in other places. When we talk of nursery in the context of children, we are talking of a place where small children are taught and taken care of. So the meaning of the word nursery may change. It keeps on changing according to the context. So multiple related meanings. So many other examples and exercises with regard to the extension of meaning, multiple meanings is given in your text. We are not going into each and every example. Let us quickly skip on to the other topic, the next topic, which is phrasal verbs. It is page, it is page number 27 online. Phrasal verbs 2.3.3 is the section that we are discussing now. In this section, we see how verbs എന്താണ് ക്രിയയാണ് ക്രിയാപദങ്ങൾ എങ്ങനെയാണ് അവർ meaning extend ചെയ്യുന്നത്. See, earlier we talked about, most of the time we talked about words. See, as we use them in the normal cases, but phrasal verbs are a bit different in the sense that they acquire meaning with the addition of an adverb or a preposition. Phrasal verbs, they form a phrase with the addition of an adverb or a preposition, sometimes both. See, online aanengil page number is 27. Phrasal verbs 2.3.3.
Page number 34, ma'am.
34. It's 34 in the textbook. Okay, phrasal verbs, we are talking about how phrasal verbs differ from ordinary verbs. Phrasal verbs are actually verbs which help forming a phrase with the addition of adverbs and prepositions. Sometimes both, sometimes either a preposition or an adverb. Okay, for example, the phrasal verb take up. Let us take up this matter. The word take has a different meaning, but when we add an adverb like up with it, it acquires a different meaning. See, taking up the matter means to discuss it or to raise it, to consider it. See, let's take up this matter to the principal is the sentence given there. See, let us take up this matter. So taking up is not similar to take. We take objects. Taking is we are handling the object. We are taking the object from one place to another. ഒരു വസ്തുവിനെ ഒരു സ്ഥലത്ത് നിന്ന് മറ്റൊരു സ്ഥലത്തേക്ക് നമ്മൾ എടുക്കുന്നതിനാണ് take എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. But when we come to the phrasal verb take up, it becomes discussion. The meaning changes and it becomes discussion or raising a problem, considering a problem. See, several other phrasal verbs can be formed using the word take. See, take over. Somebody has taken over the business. We always talk in terms of, when we talk of business firms, he has taken over the company, he has taken over the business. We use such sentences. We are familiar with such sentences. When we talk of aeroplanes, we talk of the plane taking off. The plane took off to the skies, left the ground is the meaning. See, take over means to to grab the control by force, to bring it under control. Take over. Somebody took to music. That means he has started having a liking for. He has started becoming interested in music. He took to music like duck to water. So it is like he has started showing interest, as if a duck shows interest in water. So verb plus preposition ആണ് took to എന്നതിലുള്ളത്. verb plus adverb ആണ് take off ഉള്ളത്. Took off, take off എന്നൊക്കെ പറയും. But there are cases where both adverbs and prepositions may be used. Cope up with. See, sometimes we talk of like you should cope up with the situation. So the word up is also there and the word with is also there. So three elements are there: the verb, the preposition, and the adverb. So such cases are also there for phrasal verbs. So phrasal verbs are nothing but verbs along with adverbs or prepositions, sometimes both. But there the meaning of the verb changes. The meaning of the verb changes with the addition of a particular adverb or a preposition or both. So why are we talking about phrasal verbs when we are talking language through literature? See, because authors, writers make use of phrasal verbs in order to make their piece of writing appealing, in order to attract the attention of the readers, to give them aesthetic pleasure. See, we can simply say that
ഒന്നും കേൾക്കുന്നില്ലല്ലോ മാം.
Ma'am, are you there?
കേൾക്കുന്നില്ല.
Class over.
Is the class over?
yes, hello. Actually, the class is not over. See, I encountered a power failure. We
Okay,
are switching on to the inverter. Okay. So we are talking about phrasal verbs and how and why the authors or writers make use of it. And then moving on to the another interesting use of words by authors, that is a word used as different parts of speech. 2.4 is the section that we are discussing now, a word used as different parts of speech. See, we know that there are words which can be used both as a verb and a noun. Which can be used both as a verb and a noun. See, for example, the word arrange. See, for example, the word charm, the word couple. All these words, they can move or they can be shifted from one part of speech to the other. See, when we use the word part as a noun, what does it mean? Part of a place, part of an object, part of a place, part of this beautiful town are beautiful, parts of the beautiful town are beautiful. See, there section is the meaning of the word part there. But when we are talking about the word the same, we are using the same word part as a verb. Parting my hair, I am parting my hair in the correct fashion. When we use a word like that, what we are making use of the word as a verb to part something, to divide something to make into sections. അതിനെയാണ് parting എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. So what we are doing is we are using the same word at once as a noun and sometimes we use it as a verb. The same word is used either as a noun or a verb. See, when we talk of the word charm, the word charm as a noun means a magical spell. Like he threw a charm over the girl. Like we talk about magic. If we talk about magicians, and we say a sentence like he threw a charm over her. It's a magical spell that we are talking about. But when we use it as a verb, she can charm you with her smile. She can charm you. There, the main verb is charm. That means she can win over you. She can please you with her smile. That is the meaning of the word charm in such a sentence. She can charm you with her smile. So the word charm being used in both the both as a noun and as a verb. See, if it's an online text, the page number is 29. Otherwise, it is okay. You are helping each other. Thank you. So this is how a word can be both used as a verb and as a noun. Similarly, a word can be used as an adjective and as a noun. So such cases are also there. So why do people or writers make use of it is they use it in order to charm the people, in order to appeal the attention of the readers. See the word negative. Look at the word negative. The answer is in the negative when we say that. There the word negative is used as a noun. But when we use the word negative, as we these days we use it, the test gave a negative result, corona test maybe. The test gave a negative result. There the word negative is used with the noun result and it is used as an adjective. So there it is qualifying or modifying the result, telling us the quality of the noun result. So the word negative is used both as a noun and an adjective in these two sentences. The answer is in the negative there. It is used as a noun. And when we say that the test gave a negative result, after the word negative, we have a noun. There the word is used as an adjective. So such cases are also there. So parts of speech, words with different parts of speech, words coming under different parts of speech can be made use of by writers. So that is a different use, different usage of the word, and that creates an appeal to the readers. See, similarly, we have things like, you might be asked questions from this particular part of the unit, that is unit 3, multiple meanings. Moving on to unit 3, which is multiple meanings, where we are going to talk about homophones, homonyms, etc. See, homophones, homo means same, phones means sound. So similar sounding words, words which sound the same but have different spellings and meanings. See, for example, the word there, T-H-E-I-R, or simply the word see, T-H-E-I-R and T-H-E-R-E are two words which sound the same, which are pronounced the same but have different meanings and spellings. T-H-E-I-R is the spelling of the pronoun there. Their house, avarude veedu ennu parayuma there. But the house there belongs to my uncle. അവിടെ ഇല്ല വീട്, അവിടെ എന്നുള്ള അർത്ഥത്തിൽ വരുമ്പോൾ THERE ആണ് ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത്. Likewise, homonyms is a set of a pair of words which actually have same spelling, same pronunciation, but different meaning. For example, the word watch, W-A-T-C-H. As a noun, it is the thing that we wear in our hand, in our arms, wristwatch. But the verb watch means watching, looking at something with keenness. I'm watching a television, I'm watching a serial. So, what happens there is we are making use of, writers make use of such words, such set of words, maybe in the same sentence or the same stanza in a poem in order to create wonders, in order to create a factor of appeal. So homophones are words which sound the same but have different spelling and meaning. Homonyms are words which have similar sound, which have similar spelling, but they differ in terms of meaning. For example, the word bank, B-A-N-K, bank. It is an institution where we carry out financial transactions, money transactions ഒക്കെ നടക്കുന്ന bank, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ river bank. So, homonym ആണത്. Homonymic pair ആണ്. Homonymic pair ആണ് ഇത്. The words like bank and watch, etc. So your text shows several examples of homophones and homonyms. We are not going into every detail or every example given in your textbook, but some of them I just mentioned. One of the example given for homonym is mole, M-O-L-E, mole. The mole on your cheek. It's a permanent, small dark spot on a person's skin, mole. The mole on her left cheek makes her look beautiful. And another example, the same word M-O-L-E has a different meaning when we talk of it in terms of an animal's skin. The fur of a mole is sometimes used for making garments. A small fur-covered animal with tiny eyes is mole. So mole can refer to a dark spot on a person's skin. It can refer to a fur-covered animal with tiny eyes. Mole nilladar animal de pere mole nilladar. It's also a permanent small dark spot on person's skin. So this is one of the examples given in your textbook. It's in page 38 online. So homophones and homonyms are two other pairs, or homonymic pairs, homophonic pairs are two other concepts which writers often make use of. See, when we look at them as words, and we discuss them as words, we may not actually find out, or we may not actually feel why such a thing is discussed in a paper like language through literature. We may wonder why such a thing or such things or such concepts are discussed in a paper like language through literature. But here, through literature, through pieces of literature, we are trying to learn the language. We are trying to get into the several concepts of the language. See, Rudyard Kipling or Robinson Crusoe, for example, he was marooned on an island. And this is a sentence from a literary piece. Jonathan Swift, Daniel Defoe Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe was marooned on an island in a sentence. But you need to know that the word maroon doesn't just mean the color maroon. It doesn't just mean the color maroon, but it also means something else. It also means that someone who is caught, someone who is isolated, alienated in an island, someone who is actually stuck, who cannot have an escape from a particular place. So such a person is, we can say that a person is marooned. So from literary pieces, or when we come across such usages of words, we need to identify them as homophones or homonyms, or we need to identify them as they are different parts of speech. One is used as a noun, one is used as a verb. We need to understand these things in order to enjoy, in order to gain pleasure, which actually is the sole purpose of literary pieces or literature as such. See, we read novels, we read short stories, we need prose pieces in order to, apart from the knowledge aspect, gaining knowledge aspect, there is something called the aesthetic pleasure. We read them to derive aesthetic pleasure. And that, the exact aesthetic pleasure which the author wants you to gather or wants you to derive, that can be derived by you only when you know such concepts and ideas. See, unless you know these ideas, these concepts, the whole message or the whole idea of the authors using a word in a particular way, placing the word in a particular way in a sentence goes, the result is zero. So it becomes, the result becomes a zero when the reader is not familiar with all such concepts. So it is in order to make you familiar with such concepts, such a paper is introduced, so that, see, next time when you take up a piece of literature, be it a sonnet, a small poem of 14 lines, be it a prose piece, whatever it be, when you go through it, when you read through it, you should enjoy it, you should gain ultimate pleasure out of it. So for that purpose, such things are introduced in your textbook on BEGLA 137. See, in the next chapter, Unit 4, Study of Literary Texts, there Mahatma Gandhi's prose piece is given, Playing the English Gentleman, and then there is Gerald Manley Hopkins's Spring. See, a portion from Gandhiji's article is given to you from the autobiography, The Story of My Experiment Truth. A piece from Gandhiji's The Story of My Experiments with Truth, his autobiography, is given to you in order to enjoy and find out, see, such literary devices or such extensive usage of a particular word or term. See, similarly, Hopkins's poem, The Spring. Sorry, the article is not there. Spring is the name of the poem. You are asked to read it. You are asked to find out the newly coined words. You are asked to locate or find out the concepts that we have learnt up till now. See, it's a sonnet. A sonnet is nothing but a 14-line poem having particular rhyme scheme. The sonnet is divided into two sections, an octave and a sestet. Octave means 8 lines. Sestet means 6 lines. 8 plus 6 makes 14. So 14-line poem ആണ് sonnet എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. Sonnet, Spring and the sonnet, Gerald Manley Hopkins's Spring. The sonnet Spring is given to you here, which contains 14 lines, an octave and a sestet. See, you are asked to enjoy it, you are asked to go through it, and how, see, these people, the writers especially, Gerald Manley Hopkins, how he has made use of words in a different way, more than the literal meaning of the word, more than the ordinary sense of the word has been brought in this sonnet in order to make you enjoy this piece of poetry, the sonnet. See, I'm just giving you an example. Let us look at this sonnet Spring. See, if you are online, the page is 63, page number 63. See, just locate the sonnet there, Spring. Okay, if in your textbook it is page number 80. Thank you. So please mute your phone. Is it Akash? Okay. See, look at the sonnets there. See, nothing is so beautiful as spring, when weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. Thrush's egg look little low heavens, and thrush through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring. The ear, it strikes like lightning to hear him sing. The glassy pear tree leaves and blooms they brush. See, if it's online, page number 63. If it's your textbook, page number 80. The glassy pear tree leaves and blooms they brush. The descending blue, that blue is all in a rush. With richness, the raising lambs too have fair their feet. See, look at the way, the beautiful way in which language has been made use of, words have been made use of. See, look at the impression created by the expression weeds, when weeds in wheels. When weeds in wheels. See, how can wheels be in weed? See, weeds be in wheels. Just think of this minute aspect or minute concept that Gerald Manley Hopkins is trying to convey. When weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush.
Can you explain, ma'am? I didn't get what he's saying up to.
Okay. Sorry. See, when weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. I'm not going to explain the whole poem, just a small idea that I want to convey. See, weeds and unwanted aitilla grass, unwanted aitilla plants, and those which grow without care. People do not care about it, that just grows suddenly amidst the plants in the garden. So when weeds in wheel, see, weeds in wheels means weeds grow quickly as if they are on wheels, as if they are moving in a vehicle. Weeds which are not taken care of, which are not at all heeded. Nobody cares about it. Nobody waters it. Nobody tries to put some manure on it. But weeds grow on their own. But here the poet says, when weeds in wheels, that means they grow as quickly as if they are on wheels, as if they are traveling in a vehicle. അത്രയും പെട്ടെന്ന് ഒരു വാഹനത്തിൽ ഇല്ലതുപോലെ അല്ല ചക്രങ്ങൾ ഘടിപ്പിച്ചതുപോലെ വീഡ്സ് എന്താണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്? വീഡ്സ് വളരുമ്പോൾ, when weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. So he's talking about the spring season. The first 8 lines, they talk about the lushness or richness of the spring season. So here he is talking of how weeds, even though nobody cares about them, even though nobody anyhow treats them well, nobody puts manure on it, nobody waters it, they grow as quickly as possible as if they are on wheels. So look at the way, see, we are simply, if we are not students of literature, if we are just lame readers, we may not get this beauty of the line. When weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. See, look at the way the impression is created through the la la sound in words like long, lovely, and lush. And what is it called? This kind of a usage of the same sound repeated again and again in a particular sentence in the adjacent words, we call it alliteration. Long, lovely, and lush. And then, see, a word matching with lush is used as the next word, thrush. See, the word thrush comes again towards the end of that sentence. So, this is what makes, see, literature beautiful, or this kind of usage of words is what makes literature appealing. This is what is called aesthetic beauty, which renders aesthetic pleasure to the readers. So I just gave you a minute example. See, when we look into literary devices in the next block, second block, we'll be getting further into more and more examples regarding alliteration, regarding assonance and other things. So this is one minute example that I just gave you from this particular poem. So, I think we should move on to the next block. See, this block, what are the things that we discussed today? We discussed what is called, how are words different in terms of their literal meaning and their metaphorical meaning. We talked about extension of meaning. We talked about words having multiple meanings. We also discussed what is called homophones and homonyms, how poets and writers make use of it. So these are some of the aspects that we discussed today. We saw how words can be used as different parts of speech. So these are some of the things that we discussed with regard to block 1. I hope it is useful to you. Now moving on to the second block. Quickly, we are entering into the world of literature. And we are taking care that we are also knowing or understanding language through literature. സാഹിത്യത്തിലൂടെ സാഹിത്യകൃതികളുടെ എക്സാമ്പിൾസിനെ എടുത്തുകൊണ്ട് നമ്മൾ എന്താണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്? നമ്മൾ ആ ഒരു ഏത് ഭാഷയിലാണോ ആ സാഹിത്യമുള്ളത്, ആ ഭാഷയെ കൂടുതൽ അറിയാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്, ആ ഭാഷയുടെ കൂടുതൽ കോൺസെപ്റ്റ്സ് അറിയാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ടുള്ള ശ്രമത്തിലാണ് നമ്മൾ നിൽക്കുന്നത്. So we have understood now, we know. See, when we look at a word like maroon, while reading a literary piece, we know that it can have different meanings. It may not always be, the word maroon doesn't just have the meaning, the maroon color. It's not just the name of the color, but it can also be used in a different sense. So now into unit 2, figures of speech. Literary devices is unit 2. Block 2, sorry, literary devices. Block 2, literary devices. See, in block 1, what we have discussed is we have just gone through different usages of words, different from the ordinary sense. Block 2, I told you block 2, the introduction part I am into. See, in the first block, the whole first block, we saw how, so you might be having a single text, that is why you are telling the page numbers, yes, okay. There used to be times when IGNO had 7 or 8 books for the different blocks. See, if there are 4 blocks, 4 books would be there. So I was wondering how this change has appeared. Okay, now into
But I only get 2 books, ma'am. The 136 and the 135. How I don't know, but
you don't
BGLA?
have BGLA 137. You didn't get.
No,
You have to
ma'am.
contact the center.
Actually, 137 is yeah.
Please contact the center.
Ma'am, I only get from the Delhi. So how I contact now, I will get or not, I don't know.
You will have to find it out. Maybe you can contact the nearby center, IGNO center, and ask them to help you somehow. Okay, moving on. Block 2. So as I told you in block 1, we just discussed about the various ways in which words can be used differently in the sense different from the ordinary or day-to-day usage. ഇപ്പോൾ വാക്കുകളെ സാധാരണ ദിവസേന ഇല്ല നമ്മളുടെ കമ്മ്യൂണിക്കേഷനിൽ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നത് പോലെ അല്ലാണ്ട് മറ്റൊരു രീതിയിൽ മറ്റു പല രീതിയിൽ എങ്ങനെ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നു എന്ന് മാത്രമാണ് നമ്മൾ ബ്ലോക്ക് 1-ല് പഠിക്കുകയും മനസ്സിലാക്കുകയും ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളത്. So we have learned how words can be used in a different way, different in the sense, different from the ordinary day-to-day usage. That is the only thing that we discussed in the whole block 1, all the units. Now into block 2, we are actually going to name or learn the names of several literary devices or figurative elements or figurative usage of the language. We give them names or we make use of different words in order to name the different usages. See, so block 2, in the first unit in block 2, we have to discuss things like literary devices like rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, assonance, and what is called onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia, rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, assonance, and onomatopoeia. See, these are the 5 things discussed in the first unit in block 2. In the next unit, which is unit 6, we'll discuss what is called simile, metaphor, synecdoche, metonymy, and personification. In the third unit in block 2, we'll discuss what is irony, satire, paradox, and antithesis. And in the last unit in block 2, we'll be discussing allegory, symbol, and imagery. So let's start with the first unit. The first device or literary device that we are going to learn is rhythm. See, what do you know or what is rhythm actually? See, English is a foreign language to us, but we need to keep in mind that see, all the words that use, all the words that we utter are not always having same amount of force put into them when we pronounce them. See, when we pronounce them, for example, the word pronounce. When I say pronounce, see, the word noun gets an extra bit of force while I utter it. Nouns. See, the listener can only hear the other 2 parts, the first part and the last part, a little bit. But the center part of the word, pronounce, noun, that is more audible because I utter it with somewhat more force. So such a portion or such a part, yes, such a part in a word which is uttered with somewhat more force or prominence that part is called the stressed syllable. So these parts or these units into which words can be divided on the basis of the vowel sounds present in them. See, such units or such parts, divisions, sections in a word, they are called syllables. So, English, as you might have heard from somewhere, that English is a language which is having a stress-timed rhythm. English is a language which has a stress-timed rhythm. I told you the word pronounce, when I utter the word pronounce, the second section or the second syllable gets more prominence or more force when it is uttered. So when I talk of a teacher of language and literature, I will say that the second syllable in the word pronounce gets stressed. It is the stressed syllable. Pronounce is nouns എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ആ ഒരു syllable ആണ് stressed syllable എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. So when I say that English is a language which has a stress-timed rhythm, what I mean is, see, these kind of stressed syllables occur at regular intervals in English statements, sentences. See, be it a longer word, be it a sentence, be it a phrase, whatever it is, see, stressed syllables appear at regular intervals in a particular statement, phrase, or a long word as such. So this is what is called the rhythm. So rhythm is actually controlled by, or rhythm is actually brought in by the stressed syllables that appear at regular intervals in English sentences. The stressed syllables. See, if you want to look at the textbook, it is in page online. It is
92, ma'am.
Okay, page number 92 in your textbook. If it is, you are following the block 2, page number 6. Or you can look at the section 5.2 rhythm. The term rhythm refers to a movement that occurs at regular intervals of time. I told you English has what is called stress-timed rhythm. So the rhythm is governed or brought in by the timely occurrence of the stressed syllable. So stressed syllables come again and again at regular intervals in English sentences. And that is what creates the rhythm in that particular language. So there is a wave-like movement when we speak. See, for example, this sentence, I'll read it out for you. A change of air would do you good. A change of air would do you good. So when I say that, see, somebody said 91, page number 90, yes. Okay. Page numbers do differ. So I would like to tell you that it is the subunit 5.2. The example is there in the subunit 5.2, which is titled rhythm. So a change of air would do you good. When I talk about, when I read this sentence like this, what I mean is the first article A is not stressed, unstressed. See, look at the way it is marked UI, UI. The same sentence written again and it is marked UI, UI. Below it, U means unstressed syllable. I means the stressed syllable. So in this utterance or this sentence, the first article is not stressed. The word change is stressed. The word off is not stressed. The word air is stressed. The word would is not stressed. The word do is stressed. The word you is not stressed. The word good is stressed. That means in this particular sentence, we have an occurrence of the stressed and the unstressed syllables alternatively. An unstressed syllable followed by the stressed, then again the unstressed and stressed, then again the unstressed and stressed, then again the unstressed and stress. So there is a wave-like movement. If you draw it like a wave, you'll have to start from below, you reach upward, you have to come down unstressed, you have to go up. So there is a wave-like movement which can be drawn or created when you utter this sentence. So alternatively, the unstressed and stressed syllables are repeated in this particular sentence. So it may not be the pattern always. See, this pattern will not be followed always. So, but when such a pattern is followed, the unstressed followed by stressed, such a pattern is followed in a particular line, what we call it is, this sentence is in the iambic meter. This sentence is in the iambic meter.
Ma'am, sorry, ma'am. Ma'am, can you repeat once again what you have been said, like the stress and unstress method?
Okay. See, we
you.
have the sentence here, a change of air, but do you go? See, the first article A is not stressed. So when we utter it, we will not stress it. But the word change, we will utter with somewhat more, a change. See, when we, see, just pronounce it a change. So change, the ch sound gets more prominence. It is uttered with much force. Then the word off is not stressed. The word air is stressed. The word would is not stressed. Do is stressed. The word you is not stressed. And then good is stressed. So this repeated occurrence of unstressed and stressed syllables in a single line, if this happens, we call the sentence is in the iambic meter. So most of the time in English poetry, poets make use of this iambic meter. To put it very simply, I'll tell you the nursery rhyme, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. See, there too, this alternate occurrence of stressed and unstressed syllables can be felt. See there, the first syllable is stressed, the second is not stressed. Again, the third is stressed, the fourth is not. So the pattern changes a bit, but it happens in most of the English poems, especially the nursery rhymes. So when you go through some of the English poems, what you will find is, you will find this repetition of the stressed and unstressed syllables at regular intervals. So this repetition of the stressed syllables at regular intervals, not at all bothering about the unstressed syllables. If we see or look at the repeated occurrence of stressed syllables in a particular sentence in a poem, we can find out whether it is in the iambic meter or not. And this is what renders beauty or rhythm to the poem. See, look at the example given there. The rhyme of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So he is a poet, a romantic poet whose very famous poem is The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. 4 lines from the poem are given there. Look at the way the sentences have been marked. Look at the way there is, see, a small one, a vertical line is placed just before the word bridegroom, just before the word opened, just before the word wide. So what is that? What is this vertical line? This vertical, small vertical line denotes the stressed syllable. So when you read this sentence, how will you read it? The is not stressed. Bridegroom, bride is stressed. Does not stressed. are not stressed, opened is stressed, and wide is stressed, and is not stressed, I is stressed, am is not stressed, next is stressed, of is not stressed, kin is stressed. There is a slight printing error there. Anyhow, see, so you as readers of literature or students of literature, you need to identify that this poem, when you read it, you'll have to read it in this particular manner. See, the unstressed should not be given much importance, should not be uttered with much force, but the stressed should be uttered with force, with clarity. So this is how you utter a particular poem. It is also, this poem is also in the iambic meter. That means unstressed and stressed syllables are repeated one after the other here also. So this, see, this occurrence of unstressed, stressed syllables at regular intervals gives the English language what we call the rhythm. So we were talking about rhythm. We looked at the sound patterns. We looked at the stressed and the unstressed syllables in a line, and then we reached at a conclusion that most of the English poems are in the iambic meter. So somebody asked me, how do you find the stress? See, that is what you have to learn under the paper linguistics, how to find stress. See, most of the time, I'll may try to make it simple by saying that most of the time, when you have a monosyllabic word, that means a word which cannot be further divided, a word with only one vowel, there the stress comes upon the word itself. If you have a word which can be divided into two, the stress comes upon the second last syllable. If you have a word which can be divided into three, again the stress comes upon the second last syllable. So that you have to keep in mind. See, listen to me when I utter the word photograph. See, photograph. There the stress is upon the first syllable, photograph. But when I say photographer, what happens? The second last syllable receives the stress, photographer. The first word that I uttered was photograph, P-H-O-T-O-G-R-A-P-H, photograph. But when I say photographer, the stress falls on the second last element, the second last syllable, which is to. So this is how you learn stress. I cannot spend much time teaching you stress, but maybe we'll come across the element of stress when we have the paper on linguistics. So this is how the stressed and the unstressed syllables, when they form a particular pattern, they create a particular rhythm. And that rhythm is, see, because it is created out of stress, it is created on the basis of stress, we say that English is a language which is having a stress-timed rhythm. So this is all about rhythm. Moving into rhyme. We know what rhyme is. We have heard rhyme scheme several times. See, at the final syllable of English poems, we will come across similarity of sounds. See, one or two lines might be there. They might be ending in words having similar sounds. See, a poem ending in, the first sentence is, see, for example, the example given there in your textbook. See, again, 4 sentences from the stanza from the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. He holds him with his glittered eye and listens like a 3 years child. The wedding guest stood still, the mariner has his will. See, look at the way still and will, they are similar in sound. I and child. See, there too, there is a similarity in terms of the sounds in the end of the line. See, so what happens through this rhyme scheme or the rhyme, the similarity in sound in the final syllable. Final syllable is the end syllable, the last syllable of a particular sentence in a poem. So two sentences which will have the last syllables having similar sounds. So such sentences are said to be rhymed sentences or rhymed lines. And there will be a rhyming scheme. If they follow one after the other, we say that it's the rhyme scheme is AABB. See here, in this particular example, the rhyme scheme is ABAB. So, different types of rhyme schemes might be there that we can find out with the similarity in terms of the last words in a particular stanza in a poem. See, look at the example in Check Your Progress 2. Check Your Progress 2. When you are old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. See what happens there. Sleep and deep rhyme together. That means they have similar sounds. Book and look rhyme together. So here in this particular poem from W.B. Yeats, when you are old, what happens? The rhyme scheme is A-B-B-A. A-B-B-A is the rhyme scheme here. So sleep and deep go together. They rhyme. Book and look, they rhyme. So why do we make use of rhyme? Why do poets make use of rhyme or rhyming words? See, it's simply to create a pleasing effect. They make the end of the, they mark the end of the line, and they also bind the whole thing together, the whole idea together. Using these rhyming words, poets can bind the whole idea in the lines together to bring in a unity. So that is all about rhyme or rhyme scheme. See, I think we can continue tomorrow. Today it's already 1:05. Oh, we have a class up to 1:30, yes. Okay, we can continue. I forgot. It's up to 1:30, sorry. So, rhyme scheme we have spoken about. I think the idea, the concept is clear. Moving on to the third one, which is iteration. We are talking of sound patterns as such. See, the first thing was about the stressed and the unstressed syllables repeated in a particular line at regular intervals. The second one, rhyme, is about the sound patterns observed at the end of stanzas of poems. Moving into alliteration. Alliteration is nothing but the appearance of the same consonant sound. What are consonants and what are vowels? We know vowel letters and vowel letters and we know consonants and vowels. Vowel letters and consonant letters we know, but we are not familiar with consonant sounds and vowel sounds. See, all of us might be knowing that English has 5 vowel letters, A, E, I, O and U. But the sounds produced using these 5 letters might vary. And you might be surprised to know that English has 20 vowel sounds which are created out of just these 5 vowel letters. See, these 5 vowel letters can be pronounced in 20 different ways. So it is surprising, yet it is the truth. So we have 26 letters in the English alphabet, but 24 consonant sounds and 20 vowel sounds. That makes it 44 sounds. So if we talk of a language like English, we have 44 sounds in total, 24 consonant sounds and 20 vowel sounds. So how do we create 20 vowel sounds out of the 5 vowels? I'll tell you. See, the word light. The word light has just the letter I in it. Vowel letter I മാത്രമേ light എന്ന വേർഡിൽ ഇല്ലൂ. പക്ഷെ അതിനെ എങ്ങനെ നമ്മൾ പ്രൊനൗൺസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്? I is the sound that we create out of the single letter I. But when this single letter I comes in a word like fill or pill, it is pronounced in a different way. It is pronounced as E. Pill, fill, till, until. In all those words, I is pronounced as E. But in a word like flight, in words like flight, fight, might, actually 2 sounds are produced out of the word, out of the letter I. I is the sound which is produced. And it is called a diphthong. When 2 sounds, double sounds are produced out of the single letter, we call it a diphthong. That you will be learning when you get deeper into linguistics, if there is a paper for you. Anyhow, we have to be here in this particular context, we have to just bother about consonant sounds. Diphthongs. See, diphthongs is the double vowel sound that we create when we utter a particular vowel sound, double vowel sound. See, for example, the word fear. See, the word light or the word cow. The word cow, only the vowel letter O is seen, but we pronounce it as a double letter. A double sound is produced when we pronounce the letter O in the word cow or now. Ow is the sound that we hear, and such sounds, double sounds that we produce when we utter vowel sounds, such sounds or such vowels are called diphthongs. D-I-P-H-H-O-N-G-S, diphthongs. So don't worry about it for the time being, because that you will be learning when you go further into linguistics. See, here what we are bothered about is the consonant sound. We see the consonant sound. Consonant sounds are sounds produced using all other letters except the vowel letters. Vowel letters allata mattella letters kondu uchcharikkappadunadine consonant sounds nu parayunu. P, M, T, D, K, G, all others, S, H, F, all others are consonant sounds. So, when we see or when we find, see these consonant sounds repeated in a particular line, see, poets or writers deliberately use words beginning with a consonant letter or a consonant sound in a line of a poem. See, they make it more appealing. A pleasing effect is created when we try to recite that poem. So all these are the purposes in order to make use of what is called alliteration. Alliteration is nothing but appearance of the same consonant sound or sounds at the beginning of 2 or more words that come next or close to each other in a line of a poem. See, for example, again, Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. 4 other lines are given. The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free, We are the first that ever burst into that silent sea. See, a host of full sounds you can look at, you can find when you recite that poem. The fair breeze blew, boo, boo is repeated. See, the fair breeze blew, boo is the sound, the consonant sound which is repeated, breeze blew. And then towards the end of that sentence, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free, fur, 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 fur. See, fur sound is repeated 5 times. Foam flew, the furrow followed free. The first sound is repeated 5 times there. And towards the end of that stanza, we have the silent C, the sound S at the beginning of 2 words, it is repeated. So it creates a particular effect. At the same time, it renders beauty to the lines. It is pleasing to the eyes. At the same time, it is also the pleasure-giving element in the particular stanza or the poem. So alliteration is the appearance of the same consonant sound or sounds at the beginning of 2 or more words that occur next to or close to each other in a particular line or a stanza in a poem. So alliteration is all about that. Moving on into the next literary device, we have gone through 3 literary devices: rhythm, rhyme, and alliteration. So next, assonance. I told you about vowel sounds. So when vowel sounds are repeated in a line or a stanza of a poem, we call it assonance. See, the term assonance refers to the similarity in the way words sound, especially the vowel sounds in them. See, actually, the example given in your textbook, it is wrong. Born and worn, it should be W-O-R-N. Because the word born and the word warm are not pronounced the same. So in order to have assonance or create assonance, we need to have similar sounding vowels, the same vowels in the vowel sounds in the 2 words mentioned here. Born and warm. Worn should be the word W-O-R-N. W-O-R-N should be the word there. They have made a mistake, I think. We'll be knowing it further when we read the next example. What happened? Hello? Is born and worn. So you have different examples in your textbook, is it? Born and worn, W-O-R-N should be there. My text has only that example. That is why I am telling you that it is wrong. See, born and worn, W-O-R-N should be there. So the next example, and the May month flaps its glad green leaves like wings. What happens there? Flaps and glad. The vowel sounds are the same in flaps and glad. A is the sound which is heard. Flaps, glad. The vowel sounds are same. Similarly, in the case of words like green and leaves, the vowel sounds are same. E is the sound which is heard. Green, leaves. So E is the long vowel sound which is similar in the 2 words, green and leaves. So poet has deliberately made use of words with long E. He has placed it next to each other so that it creates a pleasing effect. Yes, hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am.
There was a power failure. I have to switch on to the data. Okay, flap and glad. Flap and glad in the two words we have the word the vowel sound a, glad and flap, and in the words green and leaves we have the long vowel e which is repeated. So if in a line of a poem you find vowel sounds repeated, vowel sounds of two words lying close to each other repeated, we can say that there is a presence of what is called assonance. So here we have assonance in the line. In this particular line, assonance appears two times. One is with the words flap and glad, and with the words green and leaves. It's an example for an assonance. So now to the next one, the next literary device, which is onomatopoeia, which is nothing but the imitation of the sounds from nature. The sounds that we hear in nature, we are exactly copying it, imitating it. It is one way of forming words. Word formation ഒരു പ്രോസസ്സും കൂടിയാണ് onomatopoeia എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. See, nothing but the sounds that we hear in nature, we copy it exactly into the language. See, for example, the buzzing of bees. Buzz is the sound that we hear when bees are around. So buzz, the word buzz, we use it in order to denote the sound made by the bees. Chirp, the sounds created by the birds. Hiss, the word hiss is used to denote the sound created by the snake. The word cuckoo is used to name the bird that makes that sound. Cuckoo is the sound that the bird creates. So words directly, the sounds directly copied from nature and used as words, such words are known as onomatopoeic words. So this imitative or suggestive aspect that the language has, and when we turn it into words, we name those words as onomatopoeic words. So poets also make use of onomatopoeic words in order to have a pleasing effect on the readers as such. So this is the last literary device in unit 1 of block 2. See, I think with this we should end today's class. Since we cannot finish the next unit today, I think we shall discuss it tomorrow, fresh